Welcome to the next lesson. In this one, we're going to be talking about, well, who are the first four civilizations, at least to introduce them, and then we're going to be going into the very first civilization, which is Mesopotamian civilization. Again, just apologies, we're not going to be able to talk a ton about it. I'm not going to go into a lot of it. If it does interest you, I highly recommend like an ancient Near East type of studies class in college, because there's a lot of fun stuff in this area, and I'm not going to be able to go into it as much right now. So, but starting off, what are the four areas? First off, like I just said, Mesopotamia is the very first and located in what we know as the Middle East. Second, we have what's called the Nile River Valley, very close, by the way, to Mesopotamia. Both are actually considered Middle East to today. Then you have the Indus River Valley civilization. It says India there, but more appropriately, not appropriate. It's actually in Pakistan today. It used to be part of India until you had the split 60, 70 years ago, back in the 1940s. Then you have the Yellow River in China. Now, all four of these areas are where civilization just begins. Hunter-gatherer tribes turn into somewhat settled communities. You start getting farming going. And then, voila, civilization starts. Organized society start. These are the four places where just out of, you could say, nothingness, civilization appears. And then every other civilization in human history is tied to these four in some way, shape, or form, somehow. In some cases, we're not even sure, like the civilizations in the Americas, we're not exactly sure, but it's believed that no civilizations in the Americas actually started up out of nothingness, that somehow they came from somewhere else first, which is connected to these four areas in some way, shape, or form. So, that being said, going into Mesopotamia, the first thing we're talking about Mesopotamia is the term Fertile Crescent. Now, the entire reason we say the term Fertile Crescent is because it's what it looks like on a map. Like if you're looking at that on a map, it looks like an upside down moon. And so historians have named this Fertile Crescent, but nowhere has anybody that lived in the Fertile Crescent in the beginning of civilization ever said, I'm living in a Fertile Crescent. This is such a wonderful thing. It's not. Anyways, there's so many things that we today use to explain the past that they never used themselves. In fact, we name them things or give them names to describe them, or at least in our minds compartmentalize who they are. And those people never had those names or never thought of themselves in that way. But it's just what we do to make it easier for ourselves to understand our own history. But anyways, it's just because of the way it looks like on a map. It just looks like an upside down crescent. But it also looks like, in a way, kind of a cradle or an upside down cradle. So another term we get for the Fertile Crescent is what's called the cradle of civilization, where the very first civilizations began was in this area. And of course, I have to tell the joke that goes along with it because it looks like an upside down cradle. Well, it's the idea that we've always been so messed up because it's like we're a baby dropped on our head. We didn't start off right type thing. So, sorry, bit of a history joke, but I hope you get it. Now, the major area we're going to focus on is what's called Mesopotamia. Now notice, Mesopotamia is just this area. In fact, just really quickly, I don't know which color I should really use for this. I hope this is going to show up all right, but Mesopotamia is just this area right here. Notice if it's the Fertile Crescent, if we're talking about the Fertile Crescent here, we're talking about all of this. So you have one little section here over here that's not considered part of Mesopotamia, but is considered part of the Fertile Crescent or Cradle of Civilization. That area that I just marked in the yellow, we're not going to be talking as much about, at least right now. We will in the future, but not right now. We're mostly going to be focusing what's covered in what I just circled in the red. Anyways, which is called Mesopotamia. Now, the reason why it's called Mesopotamia is that it's literally the area in between or two rivers. As far as I understand, it's a Greek word that means in between two rivers. Those two rivers, by the way, are the Tigris River, which is this one right here. I'll just show it a little bit better. Well, you can see it up here actually much better than that one, but I'll still draw it out to help you out here. So the Tigris River is this one right here, and the Euphrates River is this one right here. Or on this map, you have the Tigris basically right here, and the Euphrates right here, where they come in and they just kind of combine basically right down at the end, and they empty into the Persian Gulf. But a perfect area for irrigation, and then the temperature is great all year round as well. I say right here, perfect place to begin a civilization. But that is Mesopotamia for, and that's kind of the setup for it. It really was just the perfect place for civilization to begin. Whether you're going on the idea that it's just happenstance, it's just all the things were in place and just civilization was able to come about at this point, or if you feel like it's by design, the idea that God said that this is the area where civilization started, well, then he made all the tools for civilization to start right there. Like, it's all right there. Great place for it to begin, and so therefore it began there as the first place in human history that we know of civilization starting. So, now a couple things to talk about. We focused on writing a lot. And I hope you get the idea of the importance of writing at this point. It's a way of keeping records. If a civilization doesn't write about itself, is it really a civilization? We talked about that in class a little bit. But now we're going to go into the first one, writing. And I remember in a couple classes I said this, but in a few others I didn't. But the whole reason we believe writing even came about in the first place was actually taxes. Once you finally get organized societies, the leaders of those societies realized, well, how do we, essentially pay for everything? How am I going to pay my armies to defend everybody? How am I going to sustain myself? Well, therefore, people owe me things. Well, how do we do this? And hopefully they're asking in their minds, how do we do this in a fair method? Well, they figure out, well, how many chickens do you have? 10? Okay. Well, maybe you owe one chicken off of that, so we'll make that little tick mark. You owe us like 1/10 of your chicken, so we'll take that one chicken. And that's essentially how writing came up. But of course, once you do that, and you're coming up with a basic number system, then you realize, wait a minute, I'm able to write down something here, 10 miles up the river, and hand it to someone down there 10 miles down the river, to my leader or whatnot. And why can't we do this with messages? Like why can't we be able to just send messages back and forth and keep records? And of course, that seemed like a very good tool to have. And then all of a sudden, you have this idea of writing in society. Now, the very first form of writing ever in human history we call cuneiform. The earliest form of Mesopotamian writing. And there's an example of it right there. Now, just note, that is not a big slab. That is tiny. That is a tiny slab you're looking at, which means those markings are also incredibly tiny. And it also, we see the first type of writing we ever have in human history. It's not like the writing we have today, like English, with an alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that's going through my mind way too much lately because I have all my kids basically in preschool and kindergarten and learning all that right now. And my 1-year-old just goes up and down. In her sleep, she is singing the ABCs, let's put it that way. But anyways, that's not this one. They don't really have an alphabet. Everything is based off of pictures, essentially, or what are called pictograms or pictographs. How do we describe a chicken? Let's make a sign that represents a chicken. Now, to go more into it, here you go. Here are some examples of early cuneiform and also how it's evolved over time. Now, I can't really say why they changed some of those symbols into what they are. And by the way, feel free to pause this video to look at that more if you'd like to. Some of them were kind of hilarious to me from what they turned into. Like, how did the fish turn into that symbol at the bottom? I have no clue. But that's a couple thousand years to see how people just mesh it into that. But I'm hoping, I would assume that it's more useful to do it in that way in the bottom than the ways in the top. It's probably, I don't know, maybe some sort of shorthand, maybe easier understood. I don't know. That's just my guess, by the way. I have no clue. But those pictures you see on the very top, that's quite understandable. It's like, well, what does a fish look like? How am I going to communicate the word fish to someone else in writing? Well, there you go. And that is the first form of writing. Now, most forms of writing like that have disappeared to this day. We do have a few around. In fact, the most prominent type of pictographic languages we still have are writings like the Chinese writings, which then have blend. Which, of course, you have Korean and Japanese and other writings, and that's in East Asia, on the other side of the world, that are still basically pictographic style languages. And yeah, they don't have a 26-letter alphabet. I keep getting told by students that take Chinese and the language teachers that teach Chinese here is like, yeah, basically you have 10,000 characters you really need to know. It's kind of like a basic alphabet. It's like, holy cow, are you kidding me? Yeah, it's easy. 10,000 easy. Okay. All right. I'll trust you on that one, and I'll stick with English and all the other languages that go off of a phonetic alphabet in some way, shape, or form. Spanish, French, Italian. Anyways. So I'm getting off the rails a little bit. I apologize. But just know this is the very first language ever cuneiform, and it is pictographic. The reason why we don't see pictographic as much any longer is it is tougher to go with. The phonetic language is a lot easier, and plus with the phonetic language, we are able to explain things easier in writing. I don't want to turn this into too much in English class, but hey, nice crossover. But it's nice to have adjectives. It's nice to have descriptors and things like that, and not just straight up nouns all over the place. Anyways, so what are the major, well, I guess I should say empire civilizations that we're going to talk about? There are lots of them, and I'm not going to be covering a bunch of them. Like just right at the front, I'm not going to be covering the Assyrians, which are a lot of fun to talk about. And in a way, I kind of feel bad not doing that. I probably should. Now that I'm doing things more online, I probably should not. I'm doing things more online. The reason why I cut them out is I didn't have enough time in class to talk about them as much. And the concepts that I'm trying to teach with early civilizations, I can easily teach with the three that I'm going to put up right here. Okay. But there's others, the Elamites, the Cushites. Man, there's a ton of different civilizations in this era that we really don't know much about. We guess a lot about, but the stories that we have about them are, well, they're fun to read because, well, they're weird, they're crazy, they're out of whack in many ways, but just definitely fascinating. So, but we're going to talk about the city-states of Sumer, the kingdom of Akkad, and the Babylonian Empire, the first Babylonian Empire. There's two Babylonian empires in history, although we usually call the second one now the Chaldean Empire. Again, going a little bit too much into it, don't worry about that. That doesn't need to go into your notes. Just going to be talking about these three. So, but at this point, I am going to stop this video just because I feel like I'm hitting the limit of the time I'd like to hit for a video. We've hit the major points that I wanted to go over, is just introducing the first four civilizations that just pop up out of nothingness. We've talked about the idea of the Fertile Crescent, what Mesopotamia is. We've talked about their writing, and then I've introduced the three that we're going into, and I will go into in the next video why these three are a big deal. If I start going into these right now, I just feel like this will go into like a 30-40 minute thing. So I'll end this at this point, and I will see you in the next lesson.